Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Ontario provincial election forecast. So, there's been a lot of movement in this last week, though I don't think that should surprise anyone who's watched more than one election in any great detail. The second round of debates occurred, and I think that was the final round of debates occurred. And naturally, we're also getting closer to election day. It's the 22nd, as of the publishing of this video, and election day is June 2nd. So we have just under 2 weeks to go. What is that? 11 days. The election. So as we are getting closer to the end, it's obviously the field's going to congeal and people are going to settle more. One of the areas we're seeing that is it looks like between the Liberals and the NDP, since the Liberals, they had a lot of momentum early on in the race, getting up to high 20s, low 30s, but never really sustaining into the 30s range. And it seems that between Del Duca's lack of charisma, at least I've not seen anyone describe him as charismatic, and he seems very plain and uninteresting when I've seen him speak. To myself, that is. Combined with the Liberals failing to really make a breakthrough, in particular in seat totals. They might, like for example, right now they're still at 26%. To about 23% for the NDP, but they're still down in seat totals because the NDP strength is more concentrated than the Liberals. Or I'm going to rephrase that. It's not that the NDP strength is more concentrated per se. It's that it's like that happy medium where it's not over concentrated and not too dilute. Where the Liberals are extremely, extremely concentrated. Like if we just flop here to raw numbers. You look at the Liberals, awful in the north, pretty bad in Hamilton, Niagara area, pretty bad in the rest of the south, great in Toronto, okay in the east, and okay in GTA. The NDP, conversely, okay in the north, okay in Hamilton, decent in Toronto and south. Now, you might be like, oh, but Bagel, you look at their okay numbers in Hamilton and North, and you compare that to East and GTA, and, well, they're about the same. Why are Liberals doing so bad in the GTA when the NDP are doing okay in Hamilton and the North? Case in point, NDP currently leading, 6 seats in the North and 5 in Hamilton Niagara, and the Liberals have nothing in the GTA. The reason for this is pretty simple. Incumbency. Though, if you want a more slightly deeper answer, the NDP will take Hamilton Niagara area, so like roughly here, by my model. The NDP are doing better here because their vote is, in this region, is relatively concentrated. It is good in Hamilton, it's decent in Niagara, and it's pretty bad in these rural regions and not great in Burlington, Oakville area. It's not terrible, but not great. This is Oakville, Burlington is where a lot of Liberal voters in the region are. No, not entirely, but generally. So their vote is more concentrated, so they actually pick up seats in these areas, whereas the Liberal vote in, say, the GTA is pretty evenly spread out across all these districts. And if you evenly spread out your vote, you just don't win anymore. You don't have enough concentration in any particular district to win. Now, I personally suspect the district drawing in the GTA really needs a refresher. I think we're seeing this in the federal as well because they share the same district boundaries, that the GTA seems to be I don't want to say gerrymandered because obviously it's the provincial Conservatives benefiting from it, but it seems like it's drawn in such a way that it basically guarantees a sweep. Like, if one party does well, they're going to almost win every single riding in the GTA, which is how it's been in the last couple Ontario elections that I've noticed, and the last couple federal. Now, Ontario provincial ones I'm not as confident on previously, like before Doug 4, because I've not inspected those maps in as great detail. But it's also worth noting that what's the word for it? My model's not the only one that is showing the GTA behaving like this. 338 Canada also has the GTA almost universally a sweep. And yes, I know technically speaking, last election the NDP won these seats in Brampton, but if you look at federal, there's a few seats in the GTA in this area and these parts over here that the Conservatives pick up. I believe they picked up 3. So it's not like a complete clean sweep, but it seems to be drawn in such a way that it's very easy for one party to dominate the entirety of the thing, and considering it's like 20 or something seats, it feels like a districting problem. But I'll let Elections Canada figure that out. They are redrawing the districts soon, so this might not be a problem in Canadian politics going forward, but the Liberals provincially are definitely suffering from this because their vote share across the GTA is just too evenly spread out to matter. And maybe there's nothing wrong with the districts. Maybe it's just the demographics of the GTA. Just there's a large percentage of voters who all vote the same way across the region. That might be true. I don't know. The only way to find that out is if you really did a lot of local polling, and I don't have the resources to do that, and nobody that I'm aware of has done that and published it publicly. So we see this kind of race here with the dynamic between the NDP and the Liberals. I think a lot of there were some NDP voters who had switched to Liberal early on when the Liberals were doing better, but now that it seems, from what I can gather, mediocre debate performance from Del Duca. Like, some people said he did good, some people said he did bad, but there's not really a clear he did amazing in the debates. A lot of the time I saw other people did worse than expected, and Del Duca might have done average. That was my 2 cents on them. I didn't watch them as closely as some Ontario viewers might have watched them, because as someone not from Ontario, while the debates are interesting, some of the issues don't necessarily strike as home as other ones. I remember a previous video, Premier made a flippant comment about the $1 transit, and then one of the commenters said that they're a voter that actually likes that, and that struck me as interesting, and why I love comments like these and discussions like this, because here in Nova Scotia I can't think of a single person I know, and I know lots of people who don't have cars who live in the city, who would be like, dropping the transit fees. That gets me excited, but according to this misunderstanding, I forgot your name too, because it's been a while. You are a regular viewer, but I forget which regular viewer. Apologies. But it's not something you expect. And some things like this are the intricacies you kind of lose when you're talking about a different jurisdiction's politics and different jurisdictions' problems. Again, I do my best, but I can only do so good. So, on the broad left wing of the spectrum, it really seems a lot of the voters that were switching to Liberals are now moving back to NDP and Greens, and this isn't even just a 1 week thing. It's kind of oscillating. There is a lot of oscillation in this race too. It's like a bump, decline, bump, decline. It's kind of weird. But you see here, even with the bump decline, like, start of the race, Liberals 28, then they fall to 26.6, then 27.4, then 26. That's a clear downward trajectory. NDP started at 19.7, then to 23.6, then 21.9, then 22.6. Clear upward trajectory, and similar with the greens. And I just noticed a mistake here. I have the greens at 4.5, and I forgot to update it on this map here. So in fact, I think I can... What did I just do? We're not doing that. We're doing this live. Oh, this is awful. We're gonna do this. See, I have to actually sneak in these really awkward moments so I can prove to you that this is being done live and without a cut, because if I was cutting these videos, I would have removed that. I don't like cuts, especially when I'm talking about issues like this and elections and stuff. Like, there's nothing wrong with cuts in like an entertainment thing, but when you're talking about someone like myself here who is discussing politics or discussing political opinions, I think it's disingenuous to cut, because a lot of the reason people come to listen to commentary like this is they want to see the actual opinion of somebody. And yes, I collect my thoughts and I prepare before videos like this, but it's distinct to have preparation and to read from a script. If that makes sense. And it is also distinct to reshoot sections and splice them in if you don't like how they sound. I don't really like that aesthetic. I don't really like that feel. Some people do it just fine. I don't like it. Is what it is. So, on the left here, we see in Ontario a deconsolidation, but in effect, a beneficial one. Because places like Northern Ontario and Southern Ontario, the Liberals are losing vote share to the NDP, which is actually causing NDP to have an easier time retaining their seats. So it is a beneficial situation. In general Toronto area, it's pretty chaotic and a lot of noise, because we're talking about three parties who are actually competitive in 416, so there's a ton of noise. A lot of these seats are pretty slim margins. Like, yes, a lot of these are colored in the under 40% category, but a lot of these are like 32, 34 range. Like, they're pretty low. Though, other than Guelph here, I don't think there's a single seat that is forecast to be won by less than 30%. Guelph, for the record, is being forecast to be won by the Greens at 25% of the vote. So if you live in Guelph and you don't like the Greens, when you like literally any of the other main parties, you know what? Vote, because they're all roughly low 20s. It's extremely marginal riding. I think it's probably the most marginal riding in Ontario right now. So, you know what? Make sure if you are in Guelph, you come out to vote, because your vote's going to really matter in Guelph. It matters everywhere, but you know what I mean. I hope. Now, that's the left of the spectrum. Now let's look at the right of the spectrum. So we're seeing the progressive conservatives are still losing ground here. They're down about 38. From last week, they're about 36. Or sorry, 38.6. Again, we're going to transition to the screen. It's a bit more clear. This has it at 38.1, but that's because of rounding. There's different rounding between the two models. These are the numbers you should trust more, except this one where I'm dumb and I wrote the wrong number down. But the Liberals, NDP, and Progressive Conservatives are more accurate. Here, these are calculated off of these numbers, which are rounded to one decimal place, whereas the actual thing is, I believe they're double floating point numbers. Okay, that's like kind of a dumb way to say that, but they're internally in the program they're listed as doubles. So there's like 15 decimal places or something like that. Or is it 26? I think it's 26. 26 decimal places recorded. So it might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about large numbers of people, it doesn't matter. It does cause the numbers to be slightly different. But anyways, back to the PCs here. So last week they're about 38.7. Let's go with these numbers, and they're at 38.1. So they lost about 0.6% of the vote. Interesting. And that seems to be going to the right splinter parties. Ontario parties up 0.2-ish, and New Blues up about 0.3. Though again, I will reiterate again, my Ontario and New Blue projection is there are some polls, such as Nanos and Leisure, who publish them separately, but in a lot of cases they're not distinct. They're just grouped in as other, and it's my interpolation of breaking up other into actual other, New Blue and Ontario, based off of the few polls that exist that do break them separately. Research Co. also frequently publishes the New Blue and Ontario data independent and not grouped in as other. So a large asterisk on these. I feel relatively okay with at least the ordering of them, but I'm not 100% certain. And also, this election is forecasting, generally speaking, quite a lot of people voting third party, fourth, fifth party. And I'm a bit skeptical of that. Like, there is a lot of people who are not super happy with Doug Ford and the Ontario right over things like COVID. And, among other things. COVID is one of the more poignant ones, but the Ontario Party, for example, is also to New Blue as well, are also concerned about woke culture and cancel culture and stuff like that. So, like teaching CRT and what's it called? Gender theory in schools. They don't like. Are they against gender theory publicly? Unclear. I would assume Ontario Party is, because Derek Sloan is very socially conservative and very outspoken. I doubt he would obfuscate that, but I don't know offhand. So, yes, so the Ontario Party seems to be losing some... the Progressive Conservative Party seems to be losing some steam to these far-right... Or not far-right, I don't like that term. To these... I'll call them dissident right splinter parties. Dissident as in they do not like the status quo of the Ontario provincial right wing. And it seems, based on the polling, that some of the people who are leaving the Liberals are also going that way, because the NDP only gained about 0.7, and the Greens about 0.2, so 0.9 total, and the Liberals lost 1.3, so apparently 0.4% of Liberal voters have either went to either the New Blues or the Ontario Party, because others stayed roughly constant. Which is interesting. Polling fluke? I don't know. Oversimplification of the polling? Possibly. It's really... That's something that no poll I've ever seen could really go into enough detail. It's theoretically possible, but I've never seen it, I guess. So where does this put us into the status of the race going into the final week? Like the final full week, because while I don't believe Ontario has any campaigning bans up leading into the election, the last 5 days or so of the election aren't going to be campaigning. They're going to get out to vote, which is slightly different. Hugely critical, but not the same thing. So we're looking at the last little bit of the race here. And what does this tell us? What's going on here? Well, yes, the PCs have slipped some ground, though a lot of it I don't think is them, or a lot of it isn't the opposition, their left opposition gaining ground. A lot of the seat gain is the left opposition actually splintering more, but they're splintering in a beneficial manner, if that makes sense. And they're losing some steam to the dissident right of their party. But it doesn't look like it's going to be a consequential amount. They still are set to win more seats than last time. I believe last election they won 76, and they're still currently set to win 82. And it's also worth noting, because some people have been complaining about this, that the PCs are down vote share from last election, but they're going to win more seats. That's so unfair. Yes, but no. If you look at it this way, the PCs are down 2.4% here. This is 2019 results here. And their main opposition, if we can group the Green, NDP, and Liberals together, had about 58% in 2018. Presently, their main opposition is currently looking at 53. So their main opposition has lost more vote share than they did. And it's more heavily split between the two of them, which tells you, importantly, that a lot of voters don't agree on which the Liberals or the NDP would be superior. And almost all of the votes that Doug Ford is losing are likely to the dissident right, which apparently make up about 6.5%. So, in another way to look at this, if we assume other is in a grouping of parties that we can't discern their politics, which is not true at all, but I don't want to remember or try to figure out all the different other parties in Ontario. There's probably dozens of tiny parties, like I believe there's a Libertarian Party that runs, and there's probably several others, probably some silly ones like communist parties and such like that. But the two main opposition ones are more, by every single measure that I can see, to the right of Doug Ford in this stupid left-right scale. Again, I'll reiterate, I do not like left to right. I think it's overly reductive and not particularly useful distinction, but it is a very simple way to categorize things and phrase it, so we are stuck with it as language. Not a great way to understand things, but it would be too complicated for this video to explain it otherwise. So in a lot of ways, we can actually regard the PCs doing better here not as a failing of first past the post, but as a success of it, because there is a larger percentage of voters who do not want NDP or Liberal governance this election than the last one. The percentage is higher. The NDP and the Liberals, let's ignore the Greens for a second, lost from 53 to 48, so they went from a majority to a minority. And again, this is the naive assumption that NDP and Liberal voters are interchangeable, when they're not, otherwise there would be one party. And even if you had a system that had ranked ballots, I don't think you could assume that they would go together. And if we had a proportional system in Ontario, I do not think it is clear or obvious that these vote shares would stay the same. I don't recall what the turnout numbers are, but I believe they're in the low 60s, so presumably with a proportional system, because all sorts of fringe parties can get into the system pretty easily, even in pretty strict systems like Sweden. There's a bunch of small, largely irrelevant parties. Or if you go to farcical systems like the Netherlands, where you have like 18 parties on the ballot because the threshold is so low, it's not at all clear, obvious to me, that the current parties would exist. And in fact, if you look at proportional systems, let's pick up Germany, for example, because mixed member proportional is a very popular alternative in Canada. You look at mixed member proportional in Germany, the SPD and the CDU, the generally center-left and center-right parties, dominate around mid-20s to 30s, depending on the election, and there's a bunch of parties that are around 10. So it's not clear to me that under proportional, these percentages would stay at all. And in fact, I think you'd see a lot of splintering among the Liberals and the NDP. I think a third party would form, actually. I think you would see the hardcore NDP be probably like... If we take these numbers here as sacrosanct, so there's about, say, 49% who are NDP Liberal voters. I think you would roughly see about 13-something% who are the hardcore NDP, who are the socialist types. Then you would see probably 26% who are solid left progressives, not quite socialist, as in they don't necessarily want to remove private property, but they want a lot of government intervention. And then the rest of it, let's say 10%, I'm not sure if these percentages added up, but whatever, would be like centrist liberal types. And it's not clear to me that these three would ever reliably form coalitions together in a proportional system. And I think you'd get a similar thing. You might actually see the centrist liberals and the centrist PCs form a party and have a weird centrist party. I say weird as in the party wouldn't... I don't think the party would do very well. I don't think it would have a very coherent message, but it might exist. I say coherent because the problem is with centrist positions is that you don't energize anybody, so you probably don't get a lot of donations. You don't have a lot of activists and volunteers on the ground because you're not really energizing anyone because you're campaigning on being milquetoast. And I think, as well, you would see parties like the New Blues and the Ontario parties, and the Greens, for that matter, would all swell with support, and it wouldn't be coming at the expense of the current parties. It would come at the expense of people who don't vote right now in Ontario, who are coming out to vote now because they're like, well, shit. My vote, quote-unquote, my vote matters. Your vote always mattered. It is, frankly, propagandistic to tell you your vote doesn't matter at all. Yes, we have a winner-take-all system in these districts, but if you didn't vote, you couldn't possibly win. First past the post, there is literally no downside to voting for your candidate unless you are a poor person. Poor not as in like not a lot of money, but poor as in unfortunate. We'll just use unfortunate. You're an unfortunate person who cannot get out of work to vote, in which case, frankly, there probably should be legal requirements to let you get out of vote, like reasonably get out of work to vote. I know, like, technically speaking, a lot of places that work is required to give you time off, but I know a lot of employers don't actually allow people paid time off. So if you're working hourly, to go vote, let's say it takes 2 hours to go vote, you lose 2 hours of wages. I don't think that's entirely fair, but that's not an issue we can really talk about or discuss here because, apparently nobody cares. And by that I mean literally no political party cares. I've not heard a single one ever talk about that. People care when they think about it because it's silly. And then again, I'm not sure how much of an issue it is in Ontario. I know in Nova Scotia there's people who complain that yes, technically your employer is obligated to give you time off, but they're not obligated to pay you, so hourly people oftentimes can't actually take time off because a lot of times, frankly, a lot of Canadians, not even just hourly, but a lot of Canadians are paycheck to paycheck, but unlike salaried people, hourly don't have the guarantee. They don't work, they don't get paid. The downsides of that contract, though, there are upsides. Depends. So where does this put us all? before I extend this another 20 minutes or whatever nonsense I do sometimes. Well, the race is closer than it looked at the start of the election, but frankly, it looks like Doug Ford is still going to run away with this. I think he's probably learned some lessons from Trudeau in the sense that he knows how to target his message very well to mean he can win more seats with fewer vote share, which Trudeau is very good at. And he's also done a good job of stopping his opposition from being united, though I suspect heavily that in the case of the Ontario Liberal Party, that none of the big shot Ontario Liberal alternatives were confident that they could pull out a victory against Ford in his first re-election. So I suspect a lot of them just didn't run, and that's why the Liberals are running with Del Duca right now. And I suspect, at least internally, among his staff, Del Duca doesn't entirely think he's going to win. Obviously, if he's a reasonable person, he's going to try his hardest, but I suspect he never thought he was going to win. It's just a matter of, especially for him, winning should not necessarily be the standard he's judged by. It's, can he improve on the results and rebuild the party? If he can gain 10 seats, that's pretty decent. I think if he steps down afterwards the election, that's fair, but I think if the Liberals toss him out after regaining 10 seats, I think that's a mistake. And although I can kind of see the argument to toss him out, but again, that's a bit nitty-gritty. But I think it's going to be very similar to what it was like with the federal Conservatives after Justin Trudeau's first term, where you didn't see some of the big swingers come out to try to contest it. The leadership, like you didn't see McKay or you didn't see Poilievre try to win leadership in 2017, or frankly any other, like, I don't want to just name names of Conservatives, but there's a lot of ones that seem to intentionally stay to the sideline. Like, it was a fact field, but there wasn't a lot of the usual suspects that you would expect. And I think a lot of that was because people didn't think Trudeau was beatable, and it turned out he wasn't. But that's neither here nor there. This is Ontario. Now, if you liked the video, again, as always, please like, share, subscribe. If you cannot share out these videos, it can help expand the reach of the channel and improve, well, everything. Hopefully, one day, I will cross the threshold where I get monetized, and then I will have more resources to make everything better. Right now, this is mostly funded out of my own pocket. Not that I have any problem with that. I apologize for that sound. This is a hobby at this point, but I would like to see if I could make this more successful. So, always, if you do like the content I make, do your best to share it around, let other people know about it. Word of mouth really helps in these kind of things, so that's what I'll say with this. With that, if you like to have more information about videos going forward, I do post stuff on Twitter, especially random insights I got from polling, or memes about politics specifically, if you like those, and updates on when the next video is coming out, depending on things. And sometimes I post teasers if it's a video that's not immediately obvious, like the thumbnails and stuff. In this case, if I posted this thumbnail, it would be pretty obvious what the video is. Otherwise, though, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you Tuesday with something different.